Today, I'll be talking about Immortals, Fenyx Rising, Haven, the resignation of Bioware general manager and executive producer, and the Princess Connect Crunchyroll Controversy. From Rixie, this is Debuff, and I'm your host, Steve Skeels. Immortals Fenyx Rising is Ubisoft's new Breath of the Wild-inspired title, featuring a Greek mythology-inspired open world to explore. Released on December 3rd for all consoles, PC, and Stadia, it currently has a critic score of 78 and a user score of 8.2 for the PC version on Metacritic. This seems to be fairly representative of the consensus surrounding the game right now, but I will add that different platforms have a little bit different values, more than what I would normally see, with the Switch version and Xbox One user scores up in the low 9s, while the Stadia user score is a 4.4, though that is only with a handful of ratings. Either way, the game is reviewing surprisingly well in my opinion. It looks like a good game for sure, but I initially expected it to be seen as one of the first generic attempts at making a Breath of the Wild clone. However, it appears to be a bit different than that. It's an open-world action-adventure game that takes a lighthearted approach to its story, and as well as the delivery of the world and over-the-top combat. Players take control of Fenyx, a demigod who must save the Greek gods and face Typhon, the evil titan who has trapped them. The story is told from the perspective of Prometheus, who is telling the tale to Zeus, and the both have a back-and-forth banter that makes for an entertaining delivery. The story itself is nothing groundbreaking, but it's interesting enough to keep players moving through the world. Polygon's Tyler Culp described the game as somewhere in between Breath of the Wild and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, its two most obvious influences. So, of course, that would seem like an apt comparison, but it isn't a surface-level comparison, really. The developers did take many elements of Breath of the Wild. Most obvious are the exploration mechanics, including the stamina-based climbing and gliding, as well as the shrine-like vaults, and of course the large open map. These components have been combined with many of the features found in Assassin's Creed, including combat mechanics, RPG-style talents and active skills, and of course the Greek mythology inspired by the team's work on Odyssey. The game will feel familiar, but it does have some differences that may not be for everyone. Namely, the game is open world, but unlike Zelda, there are areas you can't go to until later, either due to the story, or that you lack the upgrades to do so. The puzzles in-game may also seem comparable to those in Breath of the Wild, as they try to be physics-based to some degree, but they are typically pretty simple, and most involve moving around blocks, boulders, and activating switches. Nothing really too unique there. Combat is also much more over-the-top, as I previously mentioned, which does fit for the setting, but it will feel like a hack-and-slash RPG more than the deliberate combat of Zelda or even Assassin's Creed. I also feel like the game lacks a bit of polish. Just watching some gameplay, it looks a bit janky, and Fenyx seems to be more floaty than I would like. Overall, it's probably going to be a good game for anyone that is a big fan of open-world games and wants something new to scratch that itch. But for me, I think it's an interesting game, and I'd say really the coolest part is what a game like this stands for. We're going to start seeing more of the influence that Breath of the Wild has had on developers, and hopefully they will iterate on the formula and make some really unique titles. There are definitely other games out there that have already drawn from Breath of the Wild, but to me this is really the first game from a AAA studio that is wearing the inspiration so blatantly. I think it's great, and I can't wait to see more. Haven is a game that I have been very interested in since I first saw it. Developed by the Game Bakers, the indie team behind the popular Fury, this is a turn-based RPG that focuses on the relationship of the two protagonists. Released on December 3rd for PC, Xbox One, Series X and S, as well as PS5, it currently has a 78 critic score and a 6.8 user score on Metacritic for PC. The Series X score for the users is a bit higher at 8.0, but both have under 10 ratings right now, so there's not a lot to go on. The story itself centers around the aforementioned couple, Yu and Kei, who are already together by the time the game starts. After fleeing their home planet to be together, they arrive at Planet Source, a currently uninhabited planet. After an accident with their ship, they must now scour the planet for resources to survive and conduct repairs while dealing with the trials of their relationship. The story itself isn't super compelling on its own, but what will draw players in is the relationship between the two characters and how they develop over the course of the story. And the relationship isn't perfect. Like any realistic partnership, sometimes it can be mundane, sometimes it's hard, and I think the game illustrates this well. It's rare that games outside of dating sims make a relationship the main focus of a game's story, and Haven does it in some interesting ways outside of just the narrative. Combat has you control both characters at once, using one side of the controller for each character. Or you can have a partner control one with a separate controller if you're playing co-op. You use the characters simultaneously to set up combos and synergize attacks, supporting one another where necessary and unleashing synchronized hits. You also gain experience based on the relationship and choices made outside of combat, dialogue, cooking meals, and more. It's pretty interesting. Players will explore the planet using gravity boots that allow the characters to skate around and sometimes fly up to higher locations by traveling across flow lines. Outside of combat, much of the gameplay will revolve around collecting resources and cleaning up rust on the planet, both of which will be required to progress. Cleaning up the rust seems a bit like a tedious process, as you essentially just skate over it to pick it up like you're a vacuum, and many people have gone on to say that both that and the amount of resources you need to collect to progress can be a bit boring. Which is probably true, but I'd say it's a neat way to show the struggle of the characters and what they have to do to overcome. Instead of making it like a survival type game, there's just a lot of these tasks you're going to have to go out and do to progress. Sure, there's probably better ways, but I don't think it's so bad. Some other complaints about the game are that while the world is pretty, the planet is mostly sectioned into small, fairly empty zones. It can also be difficult to get around due to the samey look of the planet, compounded by a confusing map and sometimes unclear objectives. However, I do think it's a really neat idea for a game, and I love what they've done with the co-op. A game built for co-op as opposed to a single-player game with the multiplayer co-op component tacked on is always a rarity. And this would be an especially good title to play with a good friend or, of course, a significant other if you're both into turn-based RPGs, or maybe just want to check out something a bit different. If you're skeptical about the game, though, I would go check out some more critical reviews like those done by DualShockers or Siliconera, which rated it at 4.5 and 5 out of 10 respectively. I think it looks great, and I definitely want to try this out with a friend. Bioware was once a greatly beloved company, responsible for creating amazing RPGs like Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and perhaps most famous in recent years for the Dragon Age and Mass Effect series. However, they've been facing some trouble recently, mainly due to the fiascos that were Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem. Some fans were also disappointed with some of their other decisions. Multiple canceled titles, the ending of Mass Effect 3, the Old Republic as an MMO instead of another single-player RPG, and probably some others I can't really think of. Many will blame these occurrences on EA, who acquired them back in 2007, but regardless, they're not really the RPG darlings that they once were, and it looks like they might be in trouble yet again. On December 3rd, it was announced that BioWare's general manager and creator of Mass Effect, Casey Hudson, has left the company along with the Dragon Age executive producer, Mark Dara. BioWare has internal replacements for them, so it isn't like they left the company with holes in their roster, but it's still interesting to see this and speculate as to what it really means. Both Casey Hudson and Mark Dara made fairly lengthy statements regarding their departure, and essentially gave no true reason other than that they wanted to move on and do new things, but both basically said that they don't really know what's next for them. So unless they're just keeping quiet for now, that kind of implies to me that they left without plans, and I'd be curious to know what the reason is. The day after the announcement, Greg Ellis, a Dragon Age voice actor, tweeted about this and called it a relief that Mark Dara is no longer with the company, saying that he is a, quote, disloyal, duplicitous corporate fake, end quote, and that he was forced to resign. This has gone back and forth a bit now between them, and Ellis has further implied it was due to Dara pandering to bigots, which seems backward to me since Ellis recently voiced support for J.K. Rowling when she was under fire for her hot takes, not to mention some others he supports. But I don't really want to get into all that, just wanted to bring it up as another potential take on what may have caused this departure, at least for Dara. I prefer to think that maybe they're just tired of BioWare, or are feeling burnt out working on the same few titles, since they kept saying that they wanted to do more, but wanted to move on and do something new. Aside from Anthem, which has flopped, the last two BioWare titles released outside of the Mass Effect or Dragon Age franchise were the Old Republic MMO in 2011, and Sonic Chronicles for DS in 2008. So even if it isn't a problem with the company itself, I can imagine that they'd be quite tired of making the same games over and over. Not to mention, Casey Hudson previously left the company back in 2014, only to return as the general manager in 2017. So after just 3 more years, it looks like he's decided to peace out again. What's a shame is that the company name is really all that's left at Bioware. They'll probably never make another classic CRPG, and they have almost none of the original employees working there, including the founders who retired from the industry in 2012. I know that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad company or anything, but it feels like they're just using the name as brand recognition. I prefer to see them rebrand the company as another EA studio, or at the very least, work on games outside of their 2-pillar franchises. Because right now, I don't think I can get excited by another Bioware announcement. And obviously that's my opinion. I know some people still swear by them, but I'd like for them to make some kind of change before they pull another Anthem, and EA feels obligated to shut the studio down altogether. Which, by the way, is what EA did to Visceral Games, the studio behind Dead Space, which they claimed was due to a waning interest in single-player titles, and it's not a great sign for potential future of Bioware, in my opinion, since that's pretty much what they're famous for. Either way, I'll hold my breath for the next releases. Like I said, I'm not going to get too excited about it, but we'll see how they continue to hold up in the next few years. The last topic today is on the mobile game Princess Connect Redive, which was recently announced to be coming to the West and will be published by Crunchyroll. I don't usually talk about mobile games since I don't really play many, but I've gotten back into them a bit since Genshin Impact came out. So I've been keeping up with some more news recently, and I've heard quite a bit about Princess Connect over the years, particularly due to the recent anime. It's a pretty popular gacha game developed by Cygames. It's a standard mobile RPG that is mainly an auto-battler, with the exception of triggering some super moves. Parties consist of 5 characters, and there are over 50 that have been released in-game. The biggest draw seems to be the characters, and the fact that some cutscenes have anime-style videos. Seems like a good fit for Crunchyroll, but apparently fans are pissed. I've not played any of Crunchyroll's other published mobile titles, but from the consensus I've gathered, they're pretty notorious for being stingy, with some characters and equipment locked behind paid-only currency, or even changing content to be paid-only when bringing it to the West. This kind of stuff sucks for these games since you're pretty much left with no option but to gamble with real money if you want to get those characters or items. And plus, some of their games just feel like cash grabs in the first place, leveraging popular IPs to get people to spend money. It's not a bad business model for them, but it can suck when you factor in some of these other issues with the currency in the games. Some fans were also mad about them censoring titles, particularly the Danmachi game. It's just a bit strange for an anime company to do that. I get some companies think it's better for Western markets, and I can definitely understand that opinion. But it's a strange choice when you see some of the anime they have available on their platform. Danmachi itself is an anime with a fair amount of fan service, so censoring the game seems odd and would obviously enrage some fans that already enjoy that franchise. Personally, I don't really care about that, but what's bad is that they did say multiple times that they wouldn't censor the game, and then went and did it, and when people got mad at them about it, they told them they could go play the Japanese version if that's what they wanted. Not really the best PR. Overall, the situation is definitely tough for people that have been waiting 3 years for Princess Connect Redive to come out to the West. I get that they're worried that it will not be the same as the Japanese release, but personally I think it's overblown right now. Every article or post about the game I've seen is just getting brigaded with people saying that they hope it dies, and Crunchyroll is a terrible company, already assuming that characters will be removed and dialogue will be changed. But we don't know how much of the game they'll actually have control over yet, and Cygames may be doing the localization themselves. There's also another company mentioned in the press release, Funplex, who I can't find any information on other than that they are a game management company. So maybe Crunchyroll isn't doing much other than the actual publishing aspect of the game. Regardless, people need to chill out. It's just a game, and I hate seeing stuff like this. Shitting all over unreleased titles is not uncommon in the video game community, but it's pretty ridiculous to do it over a free-to-play game. Give it a chance, and if it's that bad, just don't play it. I'll probably check it out just to see what it's all about, but it doesn't come out till next year, so if it's worth it, maybe I'll talk more about it then. But till we see what's actually going to happen, I just hope everyone just shuts up. We'll see how it goes. Debuff is hosted by me, Steve Skeels, edited and mixed by Mason Carlton. Follow us on Instagram at DebuffPod. That's DebuffPod. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next one.